This episode of the Air Nation Guide was sponsored by the free Golden Eagles app. Download apps, complete surveys, or watch ads to earn Golden Eagles for completely free. Download the app with a link in the description and use the code ONSCREEN to get 10 Golden Eagles for free when you sign up. Welcome, pilots of the Air Nation Guide for War Thunder. Do you have no idea which nation to pick? Are you overwhelmed with the sheer number of countries in the game? Do you want to know the playstyles of each plane? Well, you come to the right place. In this 5-part series, I'll go over every single nation in the game, discussing their planes, playstyles, pros and cons, and much more, starting from the small biplanes all the way to the advanced jets of the modern era. In this episode, I'll go over the USA and Germany. The United States is the nation with the biggest and most diverse air tree. You get tons of choices for fighters, close air support, bombers, and even naval aircraft. With their top-of-the-line top-tier jets like the F-16, it's pretty clear why people will play the American air tree. But is it the right nation for you? Let's find out. The American air tree is divided into 5 lines, namely the heavy fighter, naval aircraft, strike aircraft, and the bomber lines. Starting off at Tier 1, you'll see some very basic planes. The P-shooters, the P-36s, and the first naval aircraft. Nothing too special here. It's when you get to Tier 2 that it starts getting interesting. You'll get some of the first decent fighter planes like the P-38, the P-40, and the P-51. These planes pack a heavy punch with a large amount of cannons and machine guns. The P-51 especially is a great plane to get used to mid-tier air combat. With its 4 20mm Spaniel cannons, it'll rip anything it comes across to shreds. On the other side of the tree, the naval fighters and ground attackers are pretty decent as well, with the first F-4U and the A-36. These planes also carry a large amount of weapons, namely 650 caliber machine guns. With a big ammo load as well, you'll start to learn how to aim in air battles. As for the bombers, the most notable plane is the B-25. This thing is peak bomber performance at its BR. You get a big airframe, a good choice of payload, and lots of defensive turrets. If bombers pique your interest, the B-25 would be a great start for what you'll see later on. Things get interesting in Tier 3. The Tier 2 planes get refined into much better versions of themselves. The Air Cobras become the King Cobras, maintaining their heavy firepower while improving their engine and maneuverability. You also get another P-51 with a much more powerful engine than its predecessor. While the 20mm cannons might not be there, the 50 cals are still decent, and with your big ammo load, you can take care of a good number of enemies. Booming and zooming should be your go-to playstyle, as the P-51s lack maneuverability when compared to their enemies. After the P-51, you get your first P-47. These things are the definition of close air support. When they're fully upgraded, they can carry up to 3,000 pounds of ordnance in the form of bombs and rockets. And if you run out of those, your 850 cals can make easy work of any air or ground targets. On top of all that, you can also outrun anything you face, which makes the P-47 perfect for the ground strike role. You lose a lot of energy when turning though, so be on the lookout for enemy fighters. As for the naval aircraft line, you'll see the F-4U get better and better with each variant, with their great energy retention and decent turn times. And if you're looking for a naval bomber, the F-6F is pretty solid. Unlike the Corsairs, the F-6F can carry torpedoes, which can make quick work of most enemy ships. As for the strike aircraft, you'll find the PVJ and the P-61. These planes are just ridiculous. The PVJ features 12 50 cals, while the P-61 has 4 20mm and 4 50 cals with the ability to carry 4,000 pounds of bombs. And if you'd like, you can also research a second PVJ with a 75mm cannon on top of 8 50 cals. These behemoths can be played as interceptors or close air support, that's up to you. But let me tell you, some of my most fun matches were played in these aircraft, so make sure to give them a shot. And last but definitely not least, the bomber line. You get a selection of some of the best bombers at this tier. The new B-25, the B-17, and the PB-4Y are very competent aircraft that can destroy multiple bases if used properly. And with lots of defense as 50 cals, you'll have no trouble taking care of enemy fighters. And now for Tier 4. Tier 4 is where prop planes get perfected. For the heavy fighter line, you'll find some twin-engine monsters like the P-38s and the F-82. These planes have great energy retention along with some powerful weapons. The Twin Mustang is literally 2 P-51s bolted together. What else could you want? You should play these things like interceptors, since their turn times are not the best. With their decent climb rate, you can catch up to enemy bombers and take them out. Once they're taken care of, dive on some unsuspecting fighters and climb back up. In the fighter line, you'll find the final versions of the P-51 and P-47. The Tier 4 P-51s feature powerful engines, leading to excellent climb rates and acceleration. Continuing with the great speed and high altitude performance, these planes are great for boom and zooming. Dogfighting is not advised though, as they are still P-51s. The naval aircraft evolved from the F-4U to the F-8F and the F-7F, the former being an all-purpose fighter bomber while the latter is a twin-engine interceptor. The F-8F has a strong engine, but it's not very agile or powerful. The F-7F on the other hand features plenty of cannons and machine guns, making it very useful for boom and zooming and interception. As for the strike aircraft, they pretty much turn into close air support. The AM-1 and 82 can carry a variety of payload options, which makes them a decent choice for ground or naval assaults. They're best used when a friendly plane is escorting you, since they get very sluggish at low speeds. And finally, we have the bombers. These are easily some of the best bombers you'll find in the entire game. The B-17, B-24, and especially the B-29 can take out multiple enemy bases in air battles. And while the 50 cal defensive turrets might not be the best, you can still take care of enemies on your tail. However, these all come with very big downsides, especially in the financial department. In classic Gaijin fashion, the repair costs for these things are through the roof. Even if battles have went exceptionally well, you'll struggle just to break even. That being said though, they're still very competent bombers. Rank 5 is where you see some of the early jets. The heavy fighter line turned into a light fighter line, starting with the F-80. This is one of the most beginner-friendly jets, since you're in a decent-ish BR and you got lots of ammo to work with. With their decent maneuverability and good energy retention, they're excellent boom and zoomers. In the fighter line, you'll find the F-84 and the F-86. The F-84 is definitely not the best jet out there. You've got bad maneuverability, bad energy retention, and an okay climb rate. It is half decent as close air support, but that's about it. In stark contrast, however, the Sabre is one of the best early jets in the entire game. If you're not in an up tier, you'll outrun and outturn most enemies you face. As per usual, the boom and zoom tactic is preferable, and with the M350 cals that have lots of ammo, this should be a piece of cake. Moving on to the naval aircraft line, you'll find the F-2H and the F-9F. I'll be honest, they're not that great. While they do have some great armaments, they're not very fast or agile, so most of the time you'll be stuck playing the support role. I suggest just skipping them unless you're really interested. Moving on to the strike aircraft line, you'll find the F-3D and the F-84F. First up, the F-3D. You get an air spawn, a powerful radar, and strong payload and armament options. It's also pretty maneuverable, so if you keep your speed up, the F-3D can be a pretty competitive aircraft. Following this decent plane, however, is a disappointment, to say the least. The F-84F has poor acceleration, a bad turn radius, and a bad choice of armament, and at its current BR, it's pretty much just target practice for AAMs. It does have some decent ordnance choices though, so it's somewhat decent against enemy tanks. And as for the bomber line, you get the B-57s. The Canberras are pretty decent in their roles. Compared to the heavy bombers of the previous tiers, these jets are fast and nimble. You can rush to an enemy base and return back to your airfield very quickly. They do lack countermeasures though, so be on the lookout for enemy jets. Moving on to Tier 6, you'll find some of the more advanced jets. Here, you'll see much faster planes and a lot more AAMs. This results in the gameplay being much different. It almost feels like a brand new game. Starting off with the fighter line, you get the F-104s. The starfighters have some incredible speed, but are absolutely trash when it comes to turning. Its missiles aren't the best, but if you catch someone off guard, you can easily get a kill. The boom and zoom roll is highly recommended. Up next is the fighter line. You get another Sabre, along with the F-100 and your first Phantom. The F-86F2 has the exact same flight performance as its predecessor, the only difference between them being its 20mm cannons. These guns can shred anything to pieces. However, due to its increased BR, your enemies will most likely be faster than you. Up next is the F-100. The F-100 is not that great. Compared to most of your enemies, you're pretty much outclassed in every aspect. The most notable downsides are its low speed and bad maneuverability. You do get some good ordnance though, so the ground strike roll is a decent option. And as for the Phantom, it's a decent aircraft. The positives are its engine, main weapon, and its massive choice of payload options, making it a great choice for close air support. The negatives though are that it has some lackluster missiles, basically no maneuverability, and it has no countermeasures. This means that the F-4C is strictly a boom and zoom fighter against planes. Moving on to the naval aircraft line, you'll find the F-9F-8, the F-3H, and the F-8U. I'll just cut to the chase. These planes are not very good. They have some decent maneuverability, but that's about it. These planes lack decent engines and missiles. If you want my advice, I'd say just skip these planes. Moving on to the strike aircraft line, you'll find the A4B, the FJ4B, and the AV-8C. Now, first things first, the A4B. This thing is much better as cast instead of air superiority. You've got a massive choice of ordnance, containing bombs, rockets, and even air-to-ground guided missiles along with a decent engine. Its AAMs aren't the best, and your cannons aren't very effective either, so I suggest using the Skyhawk in ground RB. Same thing with the FJ4B. You've got a wide range of bombs and rockets, but it's got a worse flight performance than the Skyhawk. So, the Fury should only be used for close air support purposes. Things get much better with the AV-8 though. This thing is an absolute beast. It's got an insane thrust to weight ratio, allowing it to accelerate and climb much better than anything it faces. On top of that, it also has some powerful cannons with lots of ammo and some excellent missiles. If there's one thing you should avoid with this thing though, it's dogfighting. It's like a brick when turning. You lose a ton of energy and your enemies can pick you off very easily. When using the Harrier, climb up to a decent altitude and pick off enemies with your missiles. And as for the bomber line, the last bomber as of the time of recording is the F-105. The Thunder Chief is a decent aircraft for close air support. With a strong engine and a wide range of payload options along with a ballistic computer, this plane can take out a good number of enemy tanks before needing to rearm. Its maneuverability is pretty bad though, and it doesn't have any countermeasures, so you need to keep an eye on your surroundings when using this plane. Up next is Tier 7. Here you'll find planes that are even more advanced than before. Starting off with the light fighter line, we have the F-5E. This plane's a very good turn fighter. If you keep your speed up, you can pretty much outturn any enemy you face. While its missiles aren't the best, they can still get the job done if used properly. Up next in the fighter line, we see another Phantom, the F-4E. The F-4E is a much better version of its predecessor. Featuring countermeasures and some very decent missiles, you get a plane that can actually put up a fight against other top tier jets. This model in particular also features the biggest choice of ordnance you'll find in the entire tech tree, making it a very solid choice for close air support as well. It is still pretty much a flying brick though, so avoid dogfights as much as possible. Moving on to the naval aircraft line, you'll find the F-8E, the F-4J, and the F-14. The F-8E is an improved variant of the F-8U, featuring better missiles and a similarly powerful engine. As for the F-4J, it's got some minor differences when compared to the other two Phantoms. The J variant features a powerful pulse-Doppler radar along with some very good missiles. However, as with any Phantom, its maneuverability is still non-existent. Instead of the traditional boom and zoom tactics, the sniper role is recommended. And last but certainly not least, we have the F-14. The Tomcat has top-notch missiles, great energy retention, and two very strong engines. It is a pretty large target though, and since the engines produce a massive amount of heat, it can be difficult to dodge missiles. If you keep an eye on your surroundings and play smart though, you can dominate almost all enemies you face. Following this iconic aircraft is none other than the A-10 and the strike aircraft line. The A-10 features some of the best air-to-ground weapons in the entire game, with a powerful 30mm rotary gun and some excellent payload options along with a ballistic computer. It also has some great maneuverability and 480 countermeasures, which makes it practically immune to AAMs. Of course, it isn't without its downsides though. The A-10's top speed is abysmal, and you got a very poor climb rate. This thing is meant for CAS, so if you take it out in the air battle, you're gonna run into problems. Stick to the ground support role and rain hell on the enemy. Following the A-10 are the two A-7s. While the A-10 might take the spotlight, these two planes have some very strong weapons as well, featuring up to 3 autocannons and a variety of bombs and rockets. Much like the A-10 however, you should avoid air-to-air combat, as their maneuverability and speed are pretty rubbish. And finally, we have Rank 8. As of patch Apex Predators, there are only 2 Rank 8 jets in the American tech tree, namely the F-16s. The flight model of the F-16 is absolutely nuts. It has insane engine power and energy retention. It retains energy so well in fact, you might have to cut your throttle and use air brakes if you want to turn effectively. The ADF variant can only carry missiles, while the A variant has a big variety of ordnance choices. This plane is currently the top dog of ARRB, and since the highest BR American premium is at 10.0, American teams will most likely dominate all top tier matches for the foreseeable future. Thanks, Gaijin. That concludes the explanation of the tiers and brings us to the summary. The Americans probably have the widest range of aircraft in the entire game. Each tier is filled with lots of choices and roles, such as air superiority, ground support, naval strike, tactical and strategic bombing, and many more. It's also very beginner friendly. Most American planes feature lots of guns that have plenty of ammo. The US is also a part of the big 3, meaning that there's a near 100% chance that they'll get new planes every single update. This means you can definitely expect the F-22 or even the F-35 to come in the near future. A couple of the downsides though are that the American tree is one of the biggest in the game. If you're looking to get to the F-16, you gotta grind for a couple of months at the very least, but if you're in it for the long run, the American tree is quite enjoyable. And now, the conclusion. Is the American tech tree beginner friendly? Definitely. In fact, it's probably up there with the most beginner friendly trees in the entire game. As for roles, American planes excel in almost every single one. They have dedicated lines for fighters, CAS, naval strike, bombers, and etc. For the tiers, it's gonna sound pretty generic, but honestly, they're all really good. While there are a couple of lackluster planes, the ranks in general are still very competent. And now, should you play the American tech tree? If you're a beginner, it's probably one of the best air trees to start with. You get some very easy to learn planes with lots of weapons and ammo, so you can learn how to aim and understand how air combat works. If you're looking for a new nation to grind, the answer is obvious. You get some of the most interesting and fun planes in the entire game, along with some of the best top tier jets. And if you're just looking to have some fun, the US is a very solid choice. Whatever you feel like playing, the American tech tree has it. Fighters, CAS, bombers, you want it, it's yours my friend. And to wrap it up, some of my personal favorite planes are the P-61 and the Cannon Stang.
The German air tree is one of the most popular trees in the game. It's mainly focused on air superiority with 2 separate fighter lines. The tree also features a heavy fighter/interceptor line, a strike aircraft line, and a bomber line. As you can see, the German air tree is quite firepower intensive. This lets you be a bit more aggressive than the other nations. You can find lots of machine guns and cannons on almost all of their planes, and with a good salvo, you can easily take out any enemy you face. Starting off with Tiers 1 and 2, you will find some basic planes. The early BF-109s will give you a good idea of what's to come later on in the fighter line. Compared to the early fighters, the B, E and F variants feature much better acceleration and top speed, along with decent energy retention. You can easily learn how to boom and zoom or dogfight with these planes. You can also start to see cannons with the Tier 2 variants, which will help you improve your aim. The German 20 mils are some of the best in game and good amount of ammo to work with. You can get an understanding of air combat fairly easily. In the second fighter line, you will see the first Focke-Wulf. This plane is quite different when compared to a BF-109. It doesn't have the turn fighting capabilities that the 109 has, but it makes up for it with its energy performance. The Focke-Wulfs are incredible boom and zoomers due to their great climb rate and energy retention, so make sure to utilize this playstyle. Keep an altitude advantage over your enemies and avoid turn fighting at all costs. Moving on to the heavy fighter line, you will see some of the best armed planes in the entire game. The Dornier 217s and BF-110s have some very powerful weapons, along with defensive turrets and ordnance on some. These planes are fast, but they also have very poor maneuverability, which means booming and zooming is yet again the way to go. As a wise man once said, speed is life, altitude is life insurance. Some of those planes can also be used as close air support. Some of the later variants can carry a 1-ton bomb, which has the capability of taking out any tank around it. Combine this with an armor-piercing belt on the cannons, and you have some very effective tank killers. And speaking of CAS, the strike aircraft line is next, the Stukas. The Ju-87s are notorious for their dive bombing capabilities. The later variants carry up to 1,500 kilograms of bombs, which makes the Stuka a fantastic choice for close air support and ground battles. Just watch out for enemy fighters or anti-air, as you desperately lack speed. Another plane which is also worth noting is the HS-129. The Duck, as it's called, has a 75mm anti-tank cannon strapped on its fuselage, which can lead to a lot of ground kills in the battlefield. If you want to learn more about how to use close air support, please check out the bootcamp video on the subject. And last but not least, we have the bomber line. While German bombers might not be on the same level as American ones, they are still decent at their roles. They feature 7.92mm machine guns for defensive turrets, which aren't the best. However, their payloads are enough to take care of a couple of bases. Some of the more notable bombers at these tiers are the Condor and the Heinkel 111. Moving up the ranks, we have tiers 3 and 4. The mid-tier German planes are some of the most infamous and versatile. The BF-109 line gets improved with each and every plane, with the F, G and even K variants. Personally, I find tier 3 the sweet spot for the 109s. The F4 and G2 variants are fast, powerful and maneuverable. They have great energy retention and climb rates, decent agility and also very effective armament. Aiming is quite easy with these planes, as the weapons are powerful and mounted on the nose. If you're looking for an introduction to mid-tier air combat, these are the perfect choice. The tier 4 variants carry on with this trend, improving on the engine and firepower. With the later models though, speed is your best friend. They're outclassed in low energy performance, so make sure to have an altitude advantage at all times. The climb rate of these planes will definitely come in handy. Moving on to the Focke-Wulf line, you will find a more niche playstyle. The A variants of the 190s are some of the best boom and zoomers in the entire game, featuring great energy retention, plenty of 20 mils, and a great roll rate. As said previously though, do not turn fight in these planes. You have poor maneuverability. As for the D variants, you get some much needed upgrades. Doras have outstanding climb rates and top speeds thanks to the new V12 engines. With a new top speed of almost over 750 km an hour, this thing is an absolute beast at boom and zooming. Same with the TAR 152. Great top speed and roll rate, very strong armament and a decent turn radius. Turn fighting is better, but still not advised with these planes. Ground support is also a viable option with them, as they can carry a decent amount of payload for a fighter. Next up are the heavy fighters and strike aircraft. The BF-110s evolve into ME-410s. These planes have some of the best firepower there be ours. Not only do they shred enemy planes, they can also take out a fair number of enemy tanks. Along with that, they also feature some decent defensive turrets, occasionally a radar, and air brakes, also very strong engines compared to the previous planes. All in all, the Me-410s make for some very versatile aircraft. Much like its predecessors though, you have a very limited maneuverability, so stick to bomber hunting or ground support. The strike aircraft line is very similar, featuring a couple of Me-410s along with the HS-129B2. Much like the Duck, these planes feature high-caliber cannons in exchange for fewer multi-purpose cannons. While they're not at the same level as the Duck, you can still take out a couple of tanks. The pinnacle of the strike aircraft line, though, are the Doe 335s. These two killing machines feature 30 and 50mm cannons, and the A1 can also carry bombs. If you're looking to bring a plane into mid-tier German ground battles, these are the planes for you. As far as bombers are concerned, get some decent choices. The Me-264 and Heinkel 177 are long-range strategic bombers with their big payload. With these, you can take out a number of bases if you use them properly. Their strong defensive 20mm cannons can also take out almost any fighters trying to intercept you, as long as you can of course aim them. As for tactical bombers, they are pretty unique. Instead of high-altitude bombing, you can rush into the battlefield, head first, zoom past anti-air, and even enemy fighters can have a hard time catching you, so utilize their speed to the best of your abilities. And now we reach rank 5. Starting off with the fighter line, we see the Me-262s. Now, I'll be honest, those planes are kind of meh. The late war German jet engines are pretty weak, which results in bad acceleration and climb rates. The weapons are also subpar. If they hit, they can do a lot of damage, but actually hitting your targets is a different story. The cannons are very inaccurate and have low muzzle velocities, similar to a grenade launcher essentially, which makes aiming beyond a couple hundred meters very hard. If you want to perform well, take a limited amount of fuel and use it like a heavy fighter. Booming and zooming is the way to go. As for the Messerschmitt 163, it's pretty unique. Instead of a traditional jet engine, the ME 163 uses a rocket engine, which leads to insanely good climb rates and acceleration. With its small profile, it's also very maneuverable. You're able to outturn and outrun almost anything you face. However, it does have downsides. Your fuel, for instance, is very limited. You can only last a couple minutes on full thrust. It also features the Mk108 cannons, the same as on the Me-262, which means the aiming will be an issue until you get the hang of it. To use this plane effectively, climb up to high altitude, cut your throttle to a minimum, and glide until you find an enemy. Then dive in, get the kill, and zoom out immediately. In the second fighter line, we have the Heinkel 162, a MiG-15 bis, and a Polish license-built MiG-17. The 162 is, well, different, to put it that way. The engine overheats the second you turn it on, it loses a lot of energy when turning, you have a very limited amount of ammo, and the energy retention is basically non-existent. That being said though, it's got a decent climb rate, and it also faces propeller planes most of the time. It also has the same 20 mils you're already familiar with from earlier in the tech tree, and has so-called Minengeschoss rounds. Give it a shot. If you like it, more power to you. If not, skip over to the MiG-15. Speaking of the MiG-15 and the MiG-17, they are both very good aircraft. The powerful engines allow them to accelerate and climb at a superb rate. Along with good energy retention, it has some very powerful cannons. But they feature a very low ammo pool, something that is gonna be pretty common on Soviet-based planes for now. So you need to learn how to aim with them to make every shot count. They make for great boom and zoomers, so get up to high altitude and pick your targets well.
Moving on to the interceptor line, you will find the Horten 229 and the G91R3. The Horten goes against every other plane in this line. Instead of heavy firepower, the Horten focuses more on the maneuverability part. The turn radius of this thing is insane. If you have enough speed, you can even outturn most prop planes. Also has some decent armaments, namely the 30mm Mk103 cannons. Unlike the Mk108 cannons, these ones actually have longer barrels and better muzzle velocity, which makes aiming much easier. As for the downsides, your engines aren't the best. You lose a lot of speed when turning, so sustained fights are definitely out of the plan. So just stick to boom and zoom, keep your speed up, and try to turn the least possible. The second, and with that also the last interceptor, is the G91R3 in this line. It's very agile, has great acceleration, very heavy firepower, and in air battles you can use it as an amazing fighter. You can easily destroy most enemies with your two 30mm cannons, which are also very fast firing. In ground battles, this plane features 4 air-to-ground missiles, which makes them very capable against tanks. Next, we have the strike aircraft line, which features another Me-262 and the F-84F. Now, the 262 is a special variant. It has no 30 mils, instead choosing to trade them in for a huge 50mm autocannon, which can tear any aircraft, even bombers, apart in a single hit. It's also a very good choice for ground battles, because it has multiple good armor-piercing belts, though it also relates to the ME-262 not just in positive aspects, but also negative aspects, that being a very bad turn rate and slow acceleration, so keep that in mind. Now, the next plane is the F-84F. It's still subpar, it's got a bad turn radius, bleeds energy fast, has mediocre firepower, and no countermeasures, which is not bad for its tier, but in up tiers you will definitely notice the disadvantages. It does really have good loadouts, that being up to 2,000 pound unguided bombs, which means it's a great strike aircraft. Next, you have the bomber line, which is sparse. You will find Arados and the IL-28. The Arados are notorious for their fast and tactical bombing capabilities. They have amazing engines with very respectable top speeds and acceleration, especially for bomber aircraft. Your abilities are limited in air battles though, but since you're a bomber, that is not as bad, as with a proper loadout you can still take out a good number of enemy vehicles in ground battles, or bomb bases quickly, and then obviously use your speed advantage to get the hell out of there, before the fighters catch on to you. We will now move on to the next aircraft, that being the IL-28. Now, the IL-28 is an interesting thing to play, as it has forward-facing 23mm cannons and also a defensive position in the rear, that being a dual 23mm cannon with a gunner that's protected by quite thick armored steel and armored glass. It is also quite fast, so fast it almost rips its own wings actually. But you got to be careful. The bomber is gonna go up against enemies that far outclass it. Like, we're talking about planes that are over 200 kilometers an hour faster than you are, which means you will have to stay alert at all times and try to just bomb and get out of there. We will now move on to tiers 6 and 7. Since the Federal Republic of Germany and the German Democratic Republic didn't really build a whole lot of planes indigenously, they essentially used whatever their alliance had available. In the case of West Germany, that is usually NATO fighters / US fighters. And you have the East German side, which is essentially what the Soviets were using. The CL-13s have very high top speed for their rank, they are very maneuverable and have amazing acceleration. But you gotta keep up that speed because your low speed maneuverability is below average. After the two Canadair Sabres, you get to the F-86K, also known as the Sabre Dog. The F-86 is different from the other Sabres. You are basically a less agile Sabre, but with a better engine and an afterburner, a radar that can actually track targets and it's not just a gun sight radar, and more powerful weapons, that being 20mm autocannons. That being said, with F-86, you should really stay in the support role. It's outclassed by most other opponents at your tier. Next, moving on to the interesting aircraft, the F-104G Starfighter. It has an extremely powerful engine, which means you have a very good top speed, acceleration, and amazing climb rate. But your maneuverability is terrible, so you need to get in at high speed, shoot a missile or shoot your board gun, and get out. It does have decent missiles, and it has the M61 Vulcan board cannon, so boom and zoom is your way to go. Anything else is essentially suicide. Next, we have the F4F, which is a variant of the Phantom for export, essentially. The German variant does not get any radar-guided missiles, so you are stuck with 4 Sidewinder missiles of varying versions. You also have great ordnance for air-to-ground, and it uses the same M61 gun you're already familiar with from the F104, so learning the new ballistics should not be any trouble. But it is still a brick. The F4 Phantom is very fast, it has 2 engines, but it is also very slow to turn, so do not turn fight yet again. Next, we'll be moving on to the East German Air Force. To the surprise of no one, these planes are almost exactly identical to Soviet variants. The MiG-19 and 21 have very powerful engines and should only be played at very high speeds, as you bleed energy a lot and fast in these planes. The MiG-21s feature very good missiles, that being the R-60 air-to-air missile. Next thing is the MiG-23 MLA, which is completely different from any previous plane. It has a very good engine, just like the planes before, but it features a little bit better maneuverability and way better missiles. It also has variable sweep wings, also known as swing wings, with which you can drastically improve your turning speeds. And if you need to get out of a situation, you can just angle the wings backwards and just zoom away. This leads to some interesting playstyles, such as sniping, ambushing, and last but not least, single turn dogfight in which you rip your wing off. And the last few planes in the tech tree are the Su-22 and MiG-23BN. These two planes are only meant for ground support. They have great ordnance choices with ballistic computers for bombs and rockets. The MiG is fast and maneuverable. The Su-22, on the other hand, is a real purpose-built ground attacker. It has guided weapons, that being laser-guided air-to-ground missiles, and also has R-60s for self-defense. It also carries better bombs and generally has more hard points to mount weapons on. For ground battles, I'd recommend the Su-22. Lastly is Tier 8, which at the time of recording this video, the only plane is the Tornado IDS. The Tornado is a bomber aircraft. You do have enough bombs to take out multiple bases on your own, and your engines allow you to get there pretty quickly. You do not have the speed or maneuverability to compete with fighter aircraft, so keep that in mind. It can also be a decent close air support with its ability to carry multiple guided bombs. All in all though, the Tornado IDS should strictly be used as a bomber/bomber interceptor, and air combat should be kept at a minimum. Now, on a different note, it has been pretty much confirmed that Germany will get the MiG-29 at some point, so there will be a fighter at Tier 8 in the future. Now, that was that for the tiers. Now it's time to look at the summary at the end. Germany has some of the best firepower in the game. Almost all of the planes after Tier 1 feature at least a 20mm caliber cannon, which can be devastating with good salvo. Some of the heavier planes may have multiple 20mm and even 30mm cannon, which can shred anything to pieces. These weapons also have some of the best belts in game, with immediate action incendiary and Minengeschoss. The fighters feature decent turn rates and excellent climb rate, which gives them an advantage over other fighters. Also, since Germany is part of the Big Three, there is a higher chance they get more planes every update. The Rank 5 jets are pretty meh, due to it being one of the earliest jets with early jet engines. The later ones are essentially good versions of other tech trees, but the West German fighter line is where the problem starts, as the Phantom is only an export variant, so it's not as good as the original. So you're best off using the Soviet fighters for fighting and then the Su-22 for CAS purposes until something better comes along. For the conclusion, Germany is one of the most beginner-friendly nations. The early BF-109s are perfect for anyone who's learning how to play air battles. For the roles, Germany excels at air supremacy and interception. Ground striking and bombing are solid. Naval striking, though, is obviously non-existent, as you only have a handful of planes equipped with torpedoes. As for the tiers, here they are. You'll find the best German planes between tiers 1 and 4. Tier 5 isn't that great, due to the early jets having worse performance than other jets, and tiers 6 to 8 are also pretty decent. Now, should you play the German air tree? If you're a beginner, go for it. As I said, learning how to play air battles with early 109s is a great choice. If you're looking for a new nation to grind, Germany is still a very good choice. Their playstyle is a unique experience, and many forward-facing weapons are a joy to use. If you're just looking to have some fun, Germany is probably one of the best nations to do that. Dogfighting and boomer-zooming the fighters is quite enjoyable. Lastly, if you want some recommendations, SK suggests the BF-109F4 and the TAR 152. Not stated which versions, so, figure it out yourselves. I guess you watched this long enough now to figure that out. And that is it for me. If you have any questions or suggestions or complaints towards the Belgian, ping him in the comments. I was only hired for voicing this. Peace. Or something. I don't know. Also, F5 Peace, Rhine 6 Mavericks when, as well as AIM-9Ls. Come on, Germany suffers, please. Also, hi Ma, I'm on the internet now.